bit of a history lesson, and I'm going to be discussing the esoteric stream. And what I essentially mean by the esoteric stream is basically all, all spiritual knowledge, all scientific knowledge, and all philosophical knowledge has found its way into our human field of understanding by various means that basically developed through different esoteric schools or foundations or institutions that sprang up in order to give mankind the opportunity to perfect certain aspects of himself. And so in the earliest days of our, well actually, relatively early in our humanity as far as our self-conscious nature is concerned, as far as from the time that we became self-conscious, self-aware entities, that there was at this time a need for us to be able to use our opportunity to, again, perfect certain aspects of our human nature. And so considering the first aspect that was worked upon far, far back into dim antiquity was our physical vehicle. And so we had to learn how to be proficient within the physical vessel, and how to again, move and be proficient just at that simple level. And so that can kind of give us a bit of an indication as to how far we've come since our humble beginnings in their self-aware stages, that was the emphasis placed on the so-called esoteric schools of the time. Now, keeping in mind that far, far back into the dim past of man, our nature was quite more spiritual, if you will, than it is now. We're much more densified in this point in time, and so we've moved forward into a point in time where we've evolved considerably since that time. But again, during that time, we were much more spiritual, and so we had opportunity to be in closer contact with certain teachers, if you will, or certain energies that existed that are part of our evolutionary process, and that worked in conjunction with our humanity in order to offer opportunities for us to, again, be taught, if you will, or shown certain insights into our nature that allowed us to progress and evolve. And this has ever been the case since the beginning of man, that there has been this guidance, if you will, behind the scenes from energies or entities, whatever term you want to use. Certainly people can consider the angelic hosts. There are different ways to differentiate these terms from the different religious dispensations and other means to describe these energies and these intelligences that actively work behind the scenes to help this unfolding process take place, and that there is an evolutionary unfolding, a divine evolutionary unfolding that takes place through our humanity. And so then as we moved into still a far past time, but more recent, the Atlantean times. Again, not everyone is going to choose to believe that these continents existed, Lemuria or Atlantis, and so that's something that might have to be taken as a hypothesis to consider this information. But nonetheless, during the Atlantean age, we became more specialized, and we started working on our emotional nature, and that was the point of or the area of work that was being considered in the esoteric schools of the time. And so this advancing took place, and then through the post-Atlantean or our current Aryan races, we find a dispensation playing out, and the mental nature, our mind quality, is what is being considered and worked upon in this, still in our day and age. And so that follows in line as far as our Aryan races with the Indian, the Persian, the Egyptian, Hebrew, Chaldean, and Babylonian, then through the Greco-Roman, and ultimately the current age that we're in, which is the Anglo-Saxon dominated aspect of our Aryan times. And we can see how different religious dispensations sprang up through these different traditions, as far as Hinduism, Buddhism, as far as India is concerned, the Zoroastrian religion through Persia, and then the so-called monotheistic religions that sprang up as far as Christianity, ultimately, and the Jewish religion, and how, and also finally Islam as well. Those three strains that were considered the monotheistic religious strain that was basically found its birth in the again the Egyptian, Hebrew, Chaldean, and Babylonian, and then again finding its way into a Christian dispensation during the Greco-Roman times. And so this mystery tradition that did crop up during these ancient times finally was replaced as the Christian impulse came into being, and these mystery schools and this mystery tradition subsided and went underground. And so then from this point on, if we fast forward a bit to the Dark Ages, in a time when knowledge had to go underground, and people that wanted to pursue certain experimentations and certain interests had to really, really be cautious, because this was the time in which the church was persecuting people for delving into things like alchemy, astrology, and these hidden sciences that are part and parcel of what esoteric science is all about. And so we find that there were individuals that were trying to carry out their own experimentations and their own means by which to understand our physical nature and to try to perfect our physical nature, or excuse me, our entire body rather, the physical, emotional, mental, and to tie that in and to align that. This became more so the interest of these schools following, well, through the Dark Ages times and on forward, that the alignment between these different vehicles in our body was the primary point of focus. And so again, through the Dark Ages, much knowledge had to go underground, and this is a day of, witch burning, book burning, and all these things. And then finally around the early 1500s through, let's say, 1600, there was a stream that came forward, a body of learning that came forward that was called the Rosicrucian stream. And that particular stream is based on Christian symbology to a large degree, and its symbol is the rose cross. And so that institution came into notoriety largely due to a particular posting. Posters were posted back during that time, obviously considering that means of communication were still rather limited, but nonetheless these posters were posted that gave an account of kind of a mystical origin of this particular organization, and that was making itself, giving a notification that this body was trying to find people that would be suitable members that could work within that group. And underneath this particular influence, again, that is very much steeped in the Egyptian and the Hebrew tradition, the monotheistic tradition, and ultimately a Christian influence that dominates the Rosicrucian symbology. And not to mention Masonry as well. Masonry during the Egyptian, Hebrew, Chaldean, Babylonian age really saw its heyday and birth come forward during that time. And so it continually moved forward through different countries and at varying levels throughout all this time as well. So it constantly was working side by side, more so behind the scenes, during all this time. And so it found its way into manifestation and continued to grow and accumulate its membership and its influence worldwide. And it's developing of a structure, a hierarchical structure that came into being that mirrors a hierarchical structure, or a pyramidal structure, if you want to look at that symbology of things in the heavens that we attempt to mirror in our human endeavors. And so the Rosicrucian strain and the very alchemists and people working with these forms of magic, so-called, during this time became more prevalent, and their writings became more well-known as time progresses, and a lot of these writings have been preserved and are available. And so we see how future esoteric organizations have gone back to these writings and tried to reinterpret them or reapply them in certain instances. And I'll give examples of that upcoming. But essentially, if we go forward even still to around 1700, between 1700 and 1800, we see vast changes in the political landscape, and we can see definite changes with the monarchy subsiding and giving up some of its control on a world scale. And if we look just from 1700 to 1776, we find that the British monarchy has loosened its grip to some degree on the American continent, on the North American continent. And so this is just part of this further unfolding of evolution, that man has to ultimately take account and take responsibility for his own self. We can't be ruled, and we can't give our powers up to some, monarchy, some ruling figurehead that that we pay homage to. So the monarchy is fast losing its hold in many respects, and that's just right and proper and part of our evolutionary unfoldment. And so we see that taking place, and then much took place as far as some political wranglings that took place behind the scenes, and we can see that there are many instances of political infiltration, if you will, or political aspirations and agendas that took place within various esoteric organizations throughout time, some being more political than others, some esoteric organizations being very apolitical and not encouraging a political outlook on things necessarily per se. So the different varying groups that had differing ones had agendas, and different ones not so much so. And so we can see through different organizations that cropped up, again around this late 1700s, that were very political in their motivation. And one prime example that some folks, quite a few folks, are very familiar with would be the Bavarian Illuminati that Weishaupt started in Germany in 1776. And they had definite political aims and an agenda to try to cause upheaval and unrest, and to try to change the existing paradigm. Some feel that their means were a bit on the underhanded or nefarious side, and I can't say I disagree with that, but it's just an example of how politics filtered into these esoteric organizations at certain levels, and how that unfolded itself in sometimes a change in political climate. And so also, before too terribly long, after the American Revolution, we see there being the climate in France, and there being a fomentation or a firing up of people there to encourage them to revolt against the monarchy. And that took place in short order, and so the kings were beheaded, and the royalty was beheaded, and a new dispensation, or a new body of individuals tried to establish order within this country, and to try to restructure the existing, again, hierarchical aspects of the government in France. And this is, again, definitely achieved through certain esoteric orders that helped foment and cause this fervor behind the scenes and at different levels to, encourage this unfolding. And so this takes place quite often, that we can point to different cultural unfoldings or different changes that take place, and look back to the influential behind-the-scenes events that helped to shape and mold what later came into manifestation. And again, there are many instances of that throughout history. If we really take the time to look, we can see how things have been influenced from the get-go. And so there are also other occult revivals that were taking place in outside of France, and in Vienna, in Austria, for instance, there was a revival taking place, and then the British occult revival started to take place as well. And so going into the 1800s, through the mid-1800s, and then coming into the late 1800s, we see a definite resurgence in interest for this esoteric information. And we see, again, a furthering of this stream becoming mainstream and finding its way into mainstream publications, becoming more focused in the public's attention. By and large, even at this point in time, this was largely, these esoteric organizations were for the most part composed of people that did have wealth, did have influence and affluence, because they were able to travel, and they were the learned people of the times. They were educated, and so they were able to speak other languages, read other languages, and so they were able to oftentimes decipher some of these ancient manuscripts, or they were just they were, in most cases, the more intelligent, I suppose, and the more progressive, forward-thinking individuals of the times that found themselves bound, well, not necessarily bound, but they felt compelled to put themselves in a position to join these organizations or make themselves aware of the stream of information that was coming through these different organizations, and to understand it for what it was in the context of the times. And so again, considering the late 1800s, we have the Industrial Revolution, and we have further technological advances that are allowing different opportunities. People are moving more so globally because transportation is changing. Before too terribly long, the phonograph, telephone is available. And so this is right at the cusp of a real flowering forth of esoteric unfolding through these various streams. And so if we want to consider, for instance, one aspect of this, when it finally made its way to America, we find in New York City in 1875 a branch cropping up. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on briefly is the esoteric stream is basically, it's composed of different aspects that tend to be, on one hand, more Western in their approach and their methodology and their philosophy, and on the other hand, a more Eastern approach that finds its origin in the Indian civilizations, the ancient Indian civilizations, or the very dawn of the so-called Aryan races. And then also the Western tradition being more so borrowed from the Egyptian or Hermetic so-called philosophy, and the Hebrew or the Kabbalistic tradition, and then the Rose Cross tradition, the Rosicrucian tradition, that also finds its way, and that is a Western tinged portion of the stream. And so these two tend to make a yin and a yang, if you will, or two complementary components to the esoteric stream. And there are many tributaries of this esoteric stream that all stream from one originating source, one divine originating source that allows all this information to filter down through these various bodies and organizations. And how they are able to, from their place of understanding and their cooperations and workings together, are able to influence the times and shape and mold what's taking place. Again, either in some cases politically, or social change is one big area of change that was an area of endeavor for a lot of these esoteric organizations, and certain prominent individuals that found their way into these organizations that had little pet projects that they were working on, or perhaps they were coming from this field before they came into the esoteric understanding, and they just brought that with them and brought the esoteric light to bear on their particular projects. And so starting in 1875 in New York City, we had a particular individual, and there's a picture that we're going to go to. The woman in the cart is Helena Blavatsky, much reviled by many, and I can understand because of the way she's been portrayed throughout history. And then to the right of her, we have G.R.S. Mead. Helena Blavatsky was the co-founder of the so-called Theosophical Society in 1875, and she wrote a great book. And when I mean great, I mean just a huge, vast, voluminous writing work of writing rather, that is called The Secret Doctrine. And after, I'm not sure if it was quite after her death or later on, the guy to the right, G.R.S. Mead, he was a writer and an esoteric student in his own right. He edited a third volume to The Secret Doctrine. And so these are some of the early individuals that were part of this particular esoteric tributary, or the Theosophical stream of esoteric understanding. And so during this time as well, we find many Masonic groups and fringe Masonry taking place. And basically what that boils down to is the established and accepted Masonic traditions weren't too partial, or didn't really cater to, or weren't too thrilled about people delving into these esoteric or occult matters necessarily. And trying to get into alchemy and different aspects of divination and these other studies that, again, were more of an occult nature and weren't really, they they weren't authorized, if you can use that term, by the traditional Masonic societies or lodges. And so we find these fringe Masonic groups. And after Helena Blavatsky passed away, we find a different individual coming into a place of prominence as far as the head of the Theosophical Society at that time. And there's a picture of Annie Besant, and you can see she's wearing a Masonic uniform and robe that relates to a co-Masonic tradition that is both co-Masonic, meaning that women and men were both equally allowed in and acknowledged. And if you look closely, she has the emblem of the 33rd degree in the center of the breast piece, and that's kind of par for the course that these individuals that were in these societies were also quite high in their respective Masonic lodges as far as their achievements and what they were trying to work on. And so Annie Besant came into esoteric science. She was one of the people that was really, for all intents and purposes, she was a British woman. Well, she came from Britain. She was more of like a socialist, really, for all intents and purposes, and she was working toward all this social reform in Britain. And so she was really coming from that perspective when she came into esoteric knowledge and tried to adapt this esoteric science to meet, what she was trying to do to help her in those ends. And the actual founders of the Theosophical Society in New York City were these two individuals behind me now, and that is, again, Helena Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott, who was a Civil War veteran. And these folks originated and initiated this Theosophical Society in America, which subsequently went on to have many branches in Europe, in particular in Britain, France, Austria, Germany. These places were, there was a hotbed of intellectualism going on in Europe at that time, and certainly America as well, but it all coincided, and again, the technology and communication and things like that were allowing this exchange to take place, and just simple posts, being able to write letters back and forth and get them to far places on the globe in relatively quick amounts of time, for that period of our history. We could see this exchange taking place and this esoteric body really spreading out over the globe and acknowledging and recognizing the other branches and working together to try to do real work, real practical work to try to change things. Again, social change and just bringing attention to different aspects of our human nature and trying to encourage us to take responsibility for our own actions and try to improve ourselves through these various means that we have at our disposal. And so this particular picture that we're showing now features one stream, one tributary that after Helena Blavatsky died in 1891, we find that, and also Olcott died in 1907, we find that there were other people that were, coming into places of prominence and leadership within the Theosophical Society. And so we have C.W. Leadbeater. He was a former priest in the Reformed Catholic Church in England, and then Annie Besant, and they did quite a bit of clairvoyant research together and things of that nature. They wrote books together, and they were basically the head of this particular branch of the Theosophical Society that ended up having in the Hollywood Hills a community called Krotona, modeled on the philosophical community that Pythagoras originated in Rome that was called Krotona. Pythagoras' Krotona being spelled with a C, Krotona in the Hollywood Hills being spelled with a K. And so this is a picture of one part of the old Krotona up in the Hollywood Hills, and it originated in 1907, so quite a ways back into that era, and not much development was going on. The Hollywood Hills, if you're familiar with that area in this day and age, or that below the Hollywood Hills and the foothills and all that kind of stuff, it's quite dense with population these days. But back then, there were mostly dirt roads, and they were just starting to develop that area. So one of the first people that were renting or rather established, I should say, on the Hollywood Hills weren't actors and things of that nature, but was a spiritual community that was called Krotona, that was a theosophically oriented community. And here's another picture of Krotona, and you can see, you know, has common style of the Southern California with the stucco style buildings and what have you. It's very reminiscent of the Southwest kind of style of building. But then there's also, you know, you see Arabic architecture intertwined as well. And so this very much, you know, reflected their esoteric leanings and their understandings and their Masonic roots as well. And so we see, well, here's another individual that was part of the community at Krotona. And this particular woman, Miss Marie Russak, was a founder of the Temple of the Rosy Cross. And so we can see again how other streams meld and merge. And so the Rosy Cross being a reference to the Rosicrucian tradition, or the more Western tinged tradition, and the Theosophical being more the Indian tinged or the Eastern tinged dispensation, but yet finding, you know, room for both within this community, because they're very accepting of all traditions. And that's a key component of these organizations. Is universal brotherhood was a key aspect of their endeavors, and so they sought to, you know, implement universal brotherhood and the rights of all men. That was a keynote of their endeavor. This is just another part of Krotona up on the hill. You can't really see, but down below it's Hollywood essentially, and it's just, there's nothing down there hardly. And this is just again part of the times that this was one of the early establishments to that area, way before the Hollywood that we know today is kicked into its heyday. And so there was also another stream after Blavatsky died in '91. Outside of the Krotona stream in Hollywood, we find in a more southern portion of California, close to San Diego, in Point Loma, California, another Theosophical stream developing, and they're being led by, again, a man and woman team, if you will. Catherine Tingley, who is pictured here, she was again, you know, an early student of Blavatsky, and Point Loma was established in 1897 and lasted ultimately through 1942 that this stream developed and manifested itself in Point Loma, again near San Diego. And they also were developing and establishing themselves in this area way, way before other people were living here. And this is really sought after, you know, real estate in this day and age, both where Krotona was established and where Point Loma lie today. And so this is an example of part of their exercises. These are the Raja Yoga children doing their rituals, if you will. And you can see the architectural style of the buildings in the background are somewhat reminiscent of the style of Krotona, and that they, you know, there were a lot of similarities between these two streams, although they, you know, profess differences to the point where they establish separate communities. And we see this fracturing taking place time and time again through the esoteric tradition, and that these different tributaries are branch themselves out. This is a part of the meeting hall, and you can see at the very center of the table Tingley and Perucker, who is the co-founder of this particular stream at Point Loma. And so, again, the fracturing is part and parcel of the means by which this information is disseminated and finds its way into a vaster, you know, response. More people can be familiar with this teaching, the more it fractures and breaks off, and different branches spring up in different areas. And so this is part and parcel of that, how that plays out. This is G. de Perucker. He was the co-founder of the Point Loma branch. It was just pictured in the previous picture, seated. This individual actually wrote a book called The Fundamentals of the Esoteric Philosophy, which was the first book I ever bought in a used bookstore that relates to these topics, and that was kind of one aspect of my particular journey or path along this area of understanding and endeavor. And so I owe a great debt, I feel, to this particular individual because I just happened to, he was the one that I guess helped me with an introduction into this understanding. This is an aerial view of Point Loma, and you can see how sparse and how non-populated this was back during this time, during the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's, again, shows that this stream found its way to the West Coast quite early. So, you know, right after the gold rush days, I guess, basically, you know, you found these spiritually based communities cropping up. And if you're familiar with a lot of the stereotypes of Southern California as far as the New Agey kind of stuff and the fluffy kind of stuff that you sometimes associate with different parts of California, you can see that that influence found its way there, quite a long time ago, and it's not surprising that that influence still remains. As a matter of fact, Krotona moved from the Hollywood Hills to Ojai, California, where it's existing today, and it still is an active Theosophical community, where an individual named Krishnamurti, who developed his own stream of teaching that further was a fracturing out of this Theosophical dispensation and how it found its way into manifestation. Now, the individual behind me now is an individual that was born in the area that we would consider today Yugoslavia, and he spoke German. This is Rudolf Steiner, and he developed what some may know of as Waldorf education, biodynamic farming, eurythmy, which is a type of motion and drama that plays out in relation to our inner energetic qualities. And this is a very groundbreaking individual. And he lived from, let's see here, he lived from the let me see what I've got here, 1861 to 1925. And here we see a picture of Rudolf Steiner with his partner, Marie Steiner von Sievers. And they were the essential founders of what came to be known as the Anthroposophical Society, which was founded initially in Dornach in Switzerland. And they built a building which has very interesting geometric components to it that I should have gotten a picture of it. I have a picture, I just didn't think to film that, which I should have. But it also has different geometric components that were very, very unique and very groundbreaking as far as architectural ideas. And that's another thing that these societies and communities were regarded for, was their groundbreaking approach to architecture, and that shouldn't surprise folks that understand the symbolism of Masonry as well. This is the symbol of the Theosophical Society and their motto, "There is no religion higher than truth," which is part of my core fundamental belief, that there is truly no religion higher than truth itself, and that truth at its highest level is universal and is one and the same, and that all the great religions and all these great esoteric streams have this ambition as their end result, that people understand, again, universal brotherhood, coming together, sharing, cooperation, all of these things that are part of the reasons that these individuals get together in the first place. They want to work from their place of understanding to help other individuals understand inner nature of man and what our latent capacity that we have as humans. It's really up to us as to how much we want to take information that's been laid out for us from time immemorial, again, through the different religious dispensations, different philosophers throughout time. Again, these esoteric organizations that have cropped up, that have been around for ages and ages, whether that be the more Western tinged aspects or the more Eastern tinged, because they all find their place of working together. Even during the late 1800s, Blavatsky had moved to England in 1887, and there was an organization that sprang up that was based on the Egyptian or the Hermetic philosophy that became known as the Golden Dawn. And these two dispensations worked together in conjunction and shared information. And so again, you see the Eastern and the Western dispensations working hand in hand for this group endeavor, and they're seeing the larger picture and not picking out the details as some other dispensations are sometimes guilty of. For instance, even the Christian, oh, I'm Episcopalian, no, I'm Lutheran, I'm this, I'm that. There's a million aspects of that are fractured and have filtered out through the Christian dispensation. That's right and fit and proper for our evolution as well. But it just goes to show how that fracturing can also lead to competition. And that's certainly part of what took place during this time, is that there was a competitive aspect and component to a certain degree that filtered and crept in. And that's just part of our human nature, that this would be part of this, that would taint to a certain degree this work, and that personalities would get in the way. And so we can look at the time after Blavatsky's death and after the esoteric tradition through Theosophy started fracturing, and certain things took place. In one instance, what took place was that Besant and C.W. Leadbeater went to India, and they found they came across this very young boy that they felt his aura was so pure that he had the potential to be a world teacher, which he eventually did become in his own right, as I spoke earlier. In Ojai, California, Krishnamurti had his own tradition that was a branch of this Theosophical impetus. And so they took Krishnamurti and his brother back to the States. They were able to legally adopt them and to start teaching him in this tradition. And so many individuals took exception to this act and saw this as somewhat blasphemous, that they were trying to perhaps put Krishnamurti at the level of a Christ. And that was not sitting well, for instance, very much with Rudolf Steiner, who came from a very, very, very deep Christian mystic interpretation for his occult organization. And so his understanding and his background forced him to withdraw from the Theosophical Society, to resign, and that's when, in 1923, the Anthroposophical Society cropped up. Now, during that time in California, when Krishnamurti was being professed as this upcoming world teacher, an individual named Alice A. Bailey was living at the Krotona community in the Hollywood Hills, and she was living with her husband, Foster Bailey. And she started coming into contact with an individual that is part of the inner plane teaching establishment, what is sometimes referred to as Christ in the Church Invisible, that these different individuals who have passed on to a relative state of perfection still stay on and work behind the scenes to influence, but not impose on our free will, but to just give us a little hint, a little reminder, or a little nudge from time to time, and to help with dispensation of knowledge and information as is needed. Scientific discovery, social change, governmental change, all these things that they have their hand in as kind of overseers of our humanity to a certain degree. Again, keeping firmly in mind that we have our free will, and they're not imposing or infringing on the free will. They just seek to show us how we can, again, tap into our capacity to the utmost, bring out our fullest potential, and do what we can in order to demonstrate in a real living manner our shared common origin and our brotherhood and our opportunities for sharing and exchange, and for ideas of universal brotherhood to really find themselves into manifestation, and again, in a real meaning way, not just some fancy flight, some fluffy little whim, wish, whatever, that this can really start to take place in a real meaningful fashion. And I think we can look around and see evidence of it in many respects if we really choose to do so in a discerning fashion. But nonetheless, Alice Bailey, as she made contact with this particular individual, this particular messenger or a member of this so-called hierarchy, and that he proposed to her that she start dictating and taking down for the publication of some books, some information that he wanted to bring out to the public. Very much in the same vein that Helena Blavatsky had been able to discern with a little assistance her great books, in particular Isis Unveiled and, excuse me, and The Secret Doctrine. And so Alice Bailey started working with this particular individual and started at first dictating. She would hear the words and she would dictate word for word what he was dictating to her. And then as Annie Besant and C.W. Lebeter, the existing leaders at Krotona at the time, kind of caught wind of this situation, they were not approving, to say the least. And so in very short order, Alice Bailey and Foster Bailey end up leaving the California community of Krotona and settling in New York, where in 1922-23, an organization was originated by them, and that organization is known as Lucis Trust, which some affectionately refer to as Lucifer's Trust. And that's just, I think, popular misconception that so many people have. Although, in all honesty, Helena Blavatsky did have a periodical, a magazine that she called Lucifer, and she goes through some, I don't want to say great pains, but she does go into detail as to why she decided to name her magazine Lucifer and the connotations of that, and putting it into relation with comparative religion and allowing people a fuller understanding of that terminology and not getting caught up in the myth and the superstition that so many have about that particular term or that energy and what it means for our evolutionary unfoldment. Because it is part and parcel. We have to have dark and light in our nature in order to progress and move forward. If we're all just good and pure and wholesome, then there would be no reason for this earth existence, no reason for our evolutionary unfoldment. And so we have to have good and evil, so-called, in order to grow and progress and have greater understanding. And so, in all fairness, I do want to mention that Blavatsky did have a magazine called Lucifer, although Lucis Trust was never referred to as Lucifer's Trust. It's just kind of, I guess, just a popular myth that's cropped up, to the best of my understanding. And then we find a series of books being written between 1919 and 1949, and this is the year that Alice Bailey passed from the earth plane. It was in 1949, but she signed on to some contract labor, if you will, 30 years' work that she signed on to with the so-called Tibetan, this particular individual that helped her with the writings of these books. She also wrote 4 books of her own that were just strictly her creation, and you can see the difference in the prose. If you really pay attention, you can see her books, you know, her perspective in opposition to the books that were dictated to her, although there was some coloring from her British upbringing and her understanding of words and phrases and what have you that did somewhat, you know, come into play as far as how this final product was laid out. But nonetheless, this process did take place for 30 years' work, a contract labor kind of situation, in order to bring this information out to the public and this further dispensation of esoteric information that has made its way into manifestation for our evolutionary unfolding and for us to use, to take in, to grow from. Then late in the 20s, we had another organization crop up that was called the Agni Yoga Society, and much of what they brought out went hand in hand with the Lucis Trust information that was being brought out through these books by Alice Bailey. And so Nicholas and Helena Roerich establishing the Agni Yoga Society, and also bringing out for the first time the so-called Agni Yoga, which is a method of yoga, which is a meditation, which basically aligns our physical nature, our lower will, with the will of God. And it's essentially a means by which one can perform what was done in the gospel narratives, by the means by which Jesus, through Christ, was able to make his will one with the Father. And he could say, I and the Father are one. This merging is something that can be worked towards through this system, Agni Yoga. In particular, it's the most potent means by which to achieve that union that I am familiar with. Not, you know, no disrespect to other magical systems or other systems that work with energy and force in an intelligent manner, directed by the will, which is another term for magic if you want to use that term, but nonetheless that this system allows for this alignment to take place and that we can unfold within our human capacity much, and we can become the high watermark of what our human achievement and unfoldment will allow. Humans have much potency and capacity inherent within them. They just, for the most part, choose to neglect it. And so we really have the opportunity to use these systems to improve ourselves. And Agni Yoga is one component of that, tapping into the very fire that animates our entire universe and that animates and vivifies every living thing. To tap into that energy at that level is very much akin to the term taking the kingdom of heaven by force. And as we work in a quick fashion, you know, we work, it's a very potent direct means, whereas working through, let's say, a religious system would be a slow, methodical process that would take many lives and a slower unfolding. Certain occult methods or certain magical means, if you want to use that term, again, that gets a lot of misinterpretations, but basically an exercise of the will using the mind to direct energy and force in an intelligent manner for the uplifting of oneself and ultimately for the uplifting of humanity. We improve ourselves to help others around us and improve the situation or the lot of those in our immediate environment. And that's part and parcel of this esoteric stream and what it allows our humanity to be able to accomplish. We work through these esoteric streams, and we use the knowledge available, and we find ways to improve, again, through science, political, social endeavor, what have you. One example would be science is acknowledging the so-called etheric body, more so and more so. And new forms of energy are essentially tapping into that etheric nature, the energy that underlies our globe and that underlies a star or anything in expression, any body. The fire that vivifies and animates all life is the so-called ether, or the Agni component. And this ties us into the highest aspects of the will nature of God. And so we have that direct link through our energy nature to the will or the intent of our Creator. And so we can make that link through these means. This etheric is being acknowledged by science. Mainstream science is taking this into account more so, and it's becoming something that's credible in the eyes of scientists, that the ether and that energy nature is a real thing that can be tapped into. And new sources of energy are cropping up that are really old sources of energy, if you really want to look at it accurately, but are being revitalized or rediscovered on a higher turn of the spiral in order for us to take advantage of them now for our upcoming opportunities of unfoldment. Let's see, the etheric, and also a book that was written back in the early 1900s, before 1910, called Occult Chemistry, that was part of the clairvoyant research that Besant and Leadbeater were doing into the inner nature of the atom and very small particles and the chemical nature of matter and the intelligence, the divine unfolding that takes place through the chemical processes in order to manifest life and intelligence and unconsciousness and unfolding of awareness. Excuse me, and how that plays itself out. And so we see these old ideas being revitalized and being accepted in our day and age by modern, the academic establishment in some cases. And so that's still a slow process, but we are seeing instances of that coming into being. Also, one thing that we have to take advantage of right now, we have opportunity to take advantage of, is the so-called Aquarian age upcoming. And there's a lot of symbolism that relates to that, but if we understand the cultural unfolding of of the esoteric streams and their individual tributaries, we can see how that unfolding is taking place and how it is part and parcel of this Aquarian unfolding. And the keynotes to that would be synthesis, and that group endeavor, group cooperation, sharing, exchange, and ideas along these lines are coming into manifestation, being carried in on this stream. And this Aquarian influence that we have upcoming for the next 2,000-year dispensation is going to definitely taint and color and influence and overshadow all unfoldment that takes place. And so group cooperation is going to be the keynote, and it's going to be the letter of the day. And we'll see that manifesting itself more so and more so. So we can see, if we follow the trends again from the earliest unfolding of this evolutionary dispensation and the esoteric stream, the teachings that have gone on side by side with our humanity and that have allowed us to progress in the means that they have, they still continue to unfold. So we have this opportunity to take advantage of if we so choose. There are various different, again, streams, and there's much writing that's available, and there's much information that's out there that's really become mainstream in this day and age that allows for us to take advantage of this esoteric science, so-called. Let me go ahead and grab a call and see what's going on this evening. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, how are you?
I don't understand it, really.
What are you having difficulty understanding?
Like, just mostly the whole thing.
Well, basically, what I'm trying to offer up today, I'll let you hang on for a second. What we're having to do today, or trying to do today, is have a little history lesson to show how different trends have cropped up in the past that have influenced different people to try to change things. They've tried to change maybe the way that government worked. They've tried to change how people were treated. You know, they want to make sure everybody got a fair shake and was treated fairly. For instance, the one lady I showed earlier, her name was Annie Besant. She worked in India quite a bit with what's called India Home Rule, and she sought to establish a means by which people in India, because they were governed by the British government at that time, they were subject to the British monarchy. So she was working to free the Indian people and help them rule themselves. So the idea of India home rule was something she was working, very diligently for, to bring that into being. So these people were trying to help people out in all kinds of areas through basically a spiritual understanding of how divinity plays out through mankind. There's a divine impulse that, it's not just through religion and things like that, but it also works its way into other areas. And certain people grasp that energy and they feel like they want to work with it. And so they feel compelled to help people at some level. And that's part of what I'm talking about, how this is unfolded through time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks for taking the time to call.
Right.
Have a nice evening. And so again, that is pretty much part and parcel of our opportunity in this evolutionary unfolding, that if we choose to consider these esoteric streams and what they are our opportunity through these streams, we can again trace our evolutionary unfolding. We can see evolution in effect from far back into our past and how it's found its way to our current age, and the different esoteric streams or tributaries. One particular stream that I want to mention is what became known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And that particular stream I'm going to be speaking about. I'm going to have a guest on next week to kind of further flesh out this history lesson. And we're going to really get into the foundation of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I'm going to have an individual on to help me flesh that out. And I'm really looking forward to that opportunity. And so I just want to give people a heads up about that if they have interest in that particular, if those words, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, mean anything to anyone, they might have some interest in tuning in next week for that show. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, you made a comment about negative religions. I was just wondering your thoughts on it. For example, I've heard like voodoo is a negative religion.
Certainly, there are a lot of, there's a negative aspect to any energy. It's a lot like the Force, actually, where the source is the same for this energy, but certain people are going to use that energy for their own selfish ends, and they're going to want to control people with energy. Certain people want to use energy to free and uplift humanity. And the esoteric streams that I'm discussing are the ones that sought out universal brotherhood. They sought to uplift all humanity and show that all men were brothers and sisters, and that we all have much in common, and that we can all work together, and there can be a golden age achieved on the planet where we share and cooperate, and our evolutionary unfolding can take place in a real positive manner. Now, there are those individuals that work through esoteric means to try to hold back our humanity as well, and they try to work for their own selfish ends. So we have to be wary of that also. Voodoo is one example of a tradition that's a mix of other traditions that is kind of maybe not such a good thing when it's all said and done. It's a controlling mechanism, and that's not a good thing ultimately. Hello, caller, you on the air? Hello, caller? Okay, I guess no caller there. Okay, nonetheless, so that's the key component of these esoteric organizations is that they were seeking and continue to seek, because the Theosophical Society is still around, Lucis Trust is still in effect, Anthroposophical Society is still available. A lot of these different streams are still here. The Golden Dawn tradition has fractured and streamed out, and we'll get into the history of that, like I said, next week, and further kind of get into some of those details. But we can see again how this fracturing takes place, and this information is spread throughout the entire globe. And certainly, as I said earlier, personalities come into being that sometimes are going to negatively affect these institutions, and they're going to suffer because people are going to get in there and they're going to try to change things according to the way they see things that may not always be best for the remainder of the individuals or the entire organization. But as we grow and evolve, we're starting to humanity is on the verge of growing up in a lot of ways, and so we're on the verge of using this understanding in a real practical way. This information was, at certain points in history, we could have been killed for trying to speak about this kind of stuff or be a proponent of this information. And it's, that just goes to show again how far we've advanced, that we have public mass communication outlets to be able to share and exchange these ideas. and to inform individuals of how we can gain power back through these institutions and the systems that they have in place, whether that be the more Western tinged branch of occultism or the Eastern tinged branch. The Western tinged branch tends to emphasize more so all aspects of our nature and to understand and work through all aspects of our human nature. Sometimes the Eastern tends to neglect physical nature and not emphasize, that aspect quite as much. But us living in this Western, hectic society, we have to take in, both aspects because we live in a Western modern society, and this, this busy world that we're a part of. We have to work within, what we have at our disposal in order to try to grow. And so we have to take both systems into account, the Western and the Eastern, and meld those into a successful effort, to try to have some real achievement in this day and age, because it's just times have changed. We can't just recede into the hills or go back into some monastery and hang out and try to reach enlightenment in that fashion. It just won't do for our time. And so we have to look towards other means to do that in the context of modern society. Hello, caller, are you on the air?
Hey, Corey, man, it's Shag. What's
Shag,
going
how are
on,
you
brother?
today, man? Thanks for taking the time to view, brother. What you got on your mind?
Well, I wanted to ask you, what practices are you in particular involved in as far as any esoteric science? I mean, in other words, what methodology and I guess you can say practices for spiritual advancement that you personally subscribe to?
Okay, I can answer that pretty briefly, I suppose. I have found my way into a system that is a proponent or adherent to the so-called system Agni Yoga. And so I'm using that means in order to help build within myself an alignment with the will aspect, and in turn use that ability to have a group achievement, because groups form around energy, and this magnetic attraction that we have at our disposal allows us to draw interested individuals into that energy stream, and so we have that available to us. So that's the means by which I've chosen to use, because it works for me. I've found good results with it, and I've been able to, I feel like, demonstrate positive growth in my own expression, and so that's the one I've tend to use. I do want to thank everybody for taking the time and trouble to view this evening, and again, I'm going to have a guest speaking about the Golden Dawn tradition next week, and I'm quite looking forward to that. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to remind folks to check out Jeff Contreras, Therefore I Am, every Tuesday, Channel 16 at 10 p.m. And also, if you could check out Chris Athanas and Reality Expander every Thursday on Channel 16 at 10 p.m. And again, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to view, and thanks, Austin. Have a nice evening. Take care.